Hls Js is a JavaScript library that plays HLS in browsers with support for MSE. Big Sur was coming out, but that for me was also a milestone of like, we want to drop Hls Js v1 with LHLS at the same time Apple drops their update. I couldn't do it. It was tough getting things in over the summer, but hearing, at Demuxed, like in every other talk, someone was like, yeah, so I threw this together with Hls Js. Like, that was awesome. It really encouraged me and kept me going.
I'm Matt, the organizer of the SF Video Technology Meetup and the Demuxed Conference.
And I'm Steve, creator of Video.js, the open source video player.
And I'm Phil, streaming specialist at Mux in London and organizer of the London Video Technology Meetup.
And you're listening to Demuxed, a podcast for and by engineers working with video.
Demuxed is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com.
We're always looking for topics, so if you have any suggestions or just want to tell us how wrong we are, you can find us on Twitter at Demuxed.
Hey everybody, welcome to the first Demuxed episode, or at least the first Demuxed recording of 2021. It's been a hot minute since our last episode. I think the last one dropped for Phil's birthday, actually.
Yep.
In October of 2020, either right around Demuxed or right after, but
it was the day before Demuxed, I think.
Oh, that's right.
I seem to remember it's the day before because we lent into that a bit.
So if you missed it, that was the low latency, real-time conversation with Quindla from Daily, who, congratulations, they just announced their Series A, I think,
Yep,
in the last few weeks, and some cool new products. So if you haven't checked that episode out, check it out. It's great. But yeah, so we're trying our best to actually be, we say this, I think we've said this like every year, but this year is going to happen for real starting in Q2 of 2021, where we're going to try to be a little bit more consistent and get folks on and have more conversation. So if you know anybody that would want to join the podcast or somebody that you think we should reach out to talk to, reach out, info@demuxed.com, or just ping any of us on Video Dev, that's video-dev.org, or Twitter, or snail mail.
We take snail mail?
Carrier pigeon.
Okay. Does that mean we have a P.O. box that people can send us things to?
I shouldn't have said snail mail. I'm not accepting your mail. So speaking of Demuxed 2020, Demuxed 2021. So we do have dates. That's the week of October 4th. So we'll probably do something similar to last year, where it's either 3 days more in the morning, or go back to the 2-day platform. We're still, as you can hear, being a little bit, we're keeping our options a little open now while we wait and see a little bit more how vaccinations continue to roll out. We're really, really, really hopeful, given how well things have been going here for the last month or two with numbers and vaccination numbers, that we can at least get domestic folks in for a sizable event in October, which would be really exciting. And then if it's still weird around international travel, then we still want to make sure that international friends can join and, really lean into having a great hybrid experience with a couple remote speakers and whatever else that means. But we're encouraging right now that we'll be able to do something in person, and then maybe something hybrid, or if we need to and things kind of, heaven forbid, take a different direction, then we'll have the same great experience last year we did online. But either way, that will happen the week of October 4th. So keep an eye out. Just go ahead and clear your schedule that week. Put OO on the calendar, whatever you need to do. But in the meantime, before then, as you know, last year was supposed to be the first time we were running Demuxed Europe. So Phil had done an amazing job of putting together a slate of sponsors, and we had a call for papers out, and we were really excited about all this stuff. And then that was supposed to be in March, right? No, April,
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and then, something happened and we weren't able to do it. So this year, still not quite there, as you can, we might be okay by the end of the year, but right now is not the time. So obviously this year it's also not going to happen. However, Jeremy from Sydney Video Technology is doing the same thing he did last year. And we're organizing, or there's very little we except for as local organizers on Phil and I's part.
I think all we technically did was give him a stream key at this point.
Yes, well, we did that excellently, might I add. So he's putting together a global video tech meetup. So it's a 24-hour mega meetup where he's got meetup organizers from all of the other meetups around the world taking an hour to present during their time zone so that we can have a full 24-hour meetup It's going to be on May 27th. So if you're interested in speaking at it, it differs from meetup to meetup, but a lot of people like to just pre-record and then do a Q&A after, or just do all pre-records, or just do it live on Zoom or something. So the organizers themselves can help you out individually, but just remember, last Thursday of May. So yeah, any other high points I'm missing there, Phil?
No, what an exciting end of the year it's looking like, though.
I know, right?
NAB, IBC, Demuxed. Like, I'm so excited. So excited to see people in person. This is when we have a travel ban and UK can't go anywhere, obviously. But, you know, I'm worried about NAB being early in that list of events in Vegas after like nearly 2 years of no human interaction. It's going to get messy. It really is.
My dice skills are going to be rusty is the real problem there.
That's true. That's true. Your craps will be crappy, one might say.
I didn't know where you're going to take that. And I'm glad that went like a better direction than I thought that was going to go. But cool. So anyway, looking forward to seeing hopefully many of you at the end of the year, and hopefully in person. So anyway, this episode we were lucky enough to get Rob from JW Player and the Hls Js project coming in to talk about coming close to hitting 1.0. And we've been through a bunch of release candidates, and I think I downloaded an RC with like 7 numbers after it the other day. So tons of work going into that thing, a bunch of amazing, exciting features right in the pipeline. And so anyway, we wanted to get Rob on to talk about what are some of those exciting new things, where the project is, and yeah, just life, liberty, pursuit of open source stuff, whatever else we want to talk about today. But anyway, thanks for joining, Rob. Do you want to give like a high-level overview of either yourself or Hls Js or both?
Sure, Matt. Thanks. So I work on the web player team at JW Player. I've been there since 2013. It's my first job in video, and my background is, I like to say, in interactive media, meaning I guess I just kind of knew Adobe and Macromedia products well prior to really working on web video. But what was good about that is I was exposed to video in different ways in QuickTime and getting QuickTime to sync with other interactive applications. Same deal with Flash, and that converted pretty well over in 2013 when, you know, Flash was on its way out, but it was still carrying a lot of the load for a lot of browsers. And based out in New York City, where JW Player is, and I don't know what else there is to tell there.
I think that's a solid start. Jumping into like, what is Hls Js and how did that project, like what are the origins of the project? Can you give us a little detail there?
Sure. Hls Js is a JavaScript library that plays HLS in browsers with support for MSE. The project was created by Guillaume du Pontavis in 2015. And there's a lot of background there. I'm not sure how much is good to talk about because, like, as I mentioned, I was working on a Flash HLS player for JW Player, and they had it sort of open to the public, not necessarily open source. And Guillaume had a Flash LS player based on that, and I think JW Player didn't like him doing consulting work with it. And the good thing that came out of all of that, though, is I think that helped spur him to create a JavaScript-based HLS player, Hls Js. I think he created it while he was at Dailymotion, or at least was maintaining it while at Dailymotion. And it really took off in terms of an easy-to-use, performant HLS solution for browsers that didn't support HLS playback natively in HTML5 video tag, but that did have MSE support. And for me at that time, like 2015, 16, we were trying to build our own at JW Player. We didn't do a port of our Flash HLS player. We built something new. It had a code name Caterpillar because like the little pieces of the caterpillar were like segments of media. But ultimately, it had some flaws in terms of like yielding too much in the browser, right? So like everything was async. It yielded so much in between like getting a sample of something and trying to transcode it and then appending it to the buffer that other things would get in the way. The page would load, JavaScript would be running on the page because you just moved your mouse or whatever, and other bugs, right? And at the time, Jerome, the JW behind JW Player, Jerome was like, just use Hls Js. Like, it's really fast. Like, just use it. So after saying no to that like 5 times, we just kind of gave up. There was too many other things to do. I think I don't remember if it was, I think we were trying to get JW Player 8 out at the time. And John Bartos, I think, had just started at JW Player. And we're like, let's give this to John. He's kind of getting the hang of things and pretty good, right? He can make this new, we call them providers, like video adapter that could see HLS and then, wrap Hls Js to handle it in our player. And he did. And eventually started to maintain the project as well, which is pretty cool. So
Now, I'll say, I remember when Hls Js came out, I remember having like Skype calls with Guillaume and like even met up with him at IBC like years and years ago. And I really appreciated what he was doing with it because it was like just this nice focused project. Like when you're looking at something like a web player, like sometimes it's hard to think about like what is the right place to kind of break off a solid like module of this thing and just focus on this and open it up to everybody else to contribute to, right? And I just really appreciated like the focus of that project and like how clear it was and how open it was.
Yeah, it fit in perfectly for us too in the model of needing different providers or different modules, adapters for types of media. So it's an MP4. We have something that just handles, video source equals, this URL. But if we know that is type supported or whatever tested is in the browser doesn't say probably, if the browser says it can't handle it, we're going to have to handle it some other way. And we're mostly dealing with HLS streams and Hls Js was like, that was the perfect solution. And at the same time, we were looking at doing Dash with either Dash.js or Shaka Player. It's not every day that like the something.js solves all your problems. Video.js probably does most days, but we couldn't do that either. So, for obvious reasons. So it's nice. I think there's a lot to say about what HLS is and what its purpose is related to that, right? It'd be great to have Guillaume and John even on the show and get their take on it. But for me, the goal of Hls Js was always to play HLS streams in the browser as well as Safari does. So in other words, when you're not in Safari and you want to play an HLS stream, if you use Hls Js, it should be able to play the same streams that Safari can play just as well. But on top of that, it's really configurable. Like you can set up how much you want to buffer ahead or how much of the back buffer you want to clear. There's so many settings. It's extensible. You can replace parts of it if you want to. So if you want to use your own ABR algorithm, you kind of have to replace the whole module that handles ABR, but you can do that. And it's pretty transparent in terms of giving you access to what's in the stream or what at least the player is parsing from the stream. Not just metadata, but like all the details from the manifest, how performant loading is and all the events of everything happening. So there it goes kind of overboard compared to Safari, but where we can say yes or no to whether we should fix a stream issue is like, does it work in Safari?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned like Safari as the bar because I think, a lot of people who've worked with HLS and Safari actually have had bad experiences in some ways, right? And so I think what is a big value of doing HLS, let's say manually in the browser, is that sometimes you as the person building the player actually knows better about what the audience needs than the browser is expecting, right? And so like having everything in a black box underneath the browser is not always like going to create the best option.
Yeah, I think it's also worth like taking a quick step back and talking about what is actually happening here in Hls Js because like it's gotten better in recent years, but that shit is cray. Like when you think about it on a basic level, what's happening here is this JavaScript library is grabbing manifests, parsing the manifest, making decisions around which child manifest to use, grabbing the child manifest, parsing that, downloading the segment, parsing the segment in JavaScript, and like especially, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but I assume this has gotten much better in FMP4 world, but especially when like we're talking the earliest days of this project, it's grabbing that segment, that TS segment in JavaScript, converting it into a fragmented MP4 so that it can shove it into an MSE buffer, which like, honestly, that's the kind of thing where like, I remember when that process was first pitched to me as a thing we should do, just being like, both like, yes, and also aghast, like you're going to do what in JavaScript? And it's really incredible.
Yeah, I think everybody asks, like, why would you do that? And then it's like, well, broadcast, MPEG 2, duh. Like, huh? Still don't get it? That's also like, you're a web developer. Like, why don't we use JSON? Like, well, come on, like, got to use XML or weird playlists and stuff, like broadcasts. Okay, you want to do ads? Scuddy, man, it's the way. Like, no. But yeah, so I have a lot of feelings, opinions, thoughts about like MPEG-2 TS and fragmented MP4 and CMAF and kind of where things were and where they're going, right? Like the standard was, when I got started, you'd had the TS segments, and they would be like, the standard was like 10 seconds long. Like the duration of these things is a big deal, and they've only been getting smaller in general. But that's like a decision of folks creating streams and how, what kind of latency they want or performance. And, so we're being forced to use really small segments with these parts, I'm sure, which we'll get to, the LL parts. But even without that, as a maintainer looking at issues, you'd have someone in HLS going, I've got 1 second segments and the stream is going crazy. Like there's so much stuff. Well, they don't like complain about all the stuff in the network panel, except for the times it errors or whatever. But I definitely would have always pushed back on anyone trying to do 2 second segments, at a certain point in time. Like that's crazy. You don't want to do that. And that was even like one of the reasons for being of Dash, right? It was like, with Dash, 2 second segments, you can do that. It's going to be faster than Hls Js or HLS. But yeah, you can do that now with HLS. But at a certain point, you lose some of the efficiency of how a player tries to offload that transmuxing. So it does exactly what you said, Matt, but it'll also take the data that it loads, pass it off to a worker, which can then do that transmuxing in sort of another thread, right? Or off the main thread for JavaScript so that the page can still be responsive. And then it has to give the data back to the main thread to be appended to MSE to actually be buffered once it's been turned into MP4. And I guess, yeah, there's less work with FMP4, but there's a kind of a couple things going on. Like it's not as passed through as some folks would make you believe. Like I've heard a lot of things being said like, well, with CMAF, for example, like it's really sticking to a certain specification of fragmented MP4. The browser gets it. The JavaScript just passes it to the browser. Hey, no muss, no fuss. But players kind of need to know or want to verify, at least Hls Js wants to verify the media's actual duration, like for each track, audio and video. And so there's some unboxing of the MP4 going on. You might also want to unbox the codecs, which are kind of tricky to do. Hls Js just gets the codec type, like it'll get the first, like, oh, this is AVC1, but that's it. It doesn't get the rest of like the little profile and level data after that. And if you don't know that, if that wasn't delivered in the manifest correctly, you're going to have problems when you try to initialize your source buffers and start buffering. And so that's just like one example of like a little thing I see go wrong with people's streams, especially since they might not have the main manifest. They might just give us the playlist. And so you kind of have to guess or parse out a codec. And then the TS segments are most of the time going to be muxed. You're going to have audio and video elementary streams in a single playlist. That's rarer or harder to do with fragments in MP4. And so you're almost always, and especially with CMAF, I think it's defined that you have to have separate audio and video. So now you're dealing with twice as many playlists, twice as many segments. You've got to align the two, which is easy in VOD, but not always that easy in a live stream, where you might get the two at a slightly different position, have to parsing things because you want to know like the time code that's in there to align them. Do we even do that with FMP4? I forget. Like PTS, there was we had program timestamps, right? Or is that presentation timestamps? Sorry, with MPEG-2. Yeah, what are we looking at again with FMP4? I forget, but
BMDT, base media decode time, right? Is how it puts it on the timeline. I seem to remember. I could be wrong.
I don't even know off the top of my head what's happening in Hls Js there. So there's plenty of gray areas like that for me that one day we'll get to.
Things FMP4 was supposed to fix, but really just made the world a bunch more complicated.
Sure. I think we're all going that direction, and this project will get better at it. I think there's definitely improvements I've made with version 1. I'm not going to call any out because maybe some things are worse, but that is one of the things we're going to look at more is kind of, we feel pretty confident that like TS is solid, but CMAF before in smaller segments, there's still some work to do around just improving performance there, handling, and it's not always just pass through. There's still some work that needs to happen And actually sometimes by like offloading things to a worker, we're creating more work, or we're recreating that scenario of too many async like yields in the browser that maybe don't need to be there anymore. So that same problem I was describing with like the failed HLS project that I worked on, it could be happening as we go to take smaller sips of media. There's less of a need to offload it to crunch the data and more of a need to just get it buffered as quickly as possible. And I know that the folks at the media team at Chrome have done a lot of work to handle MSE in workers and network requests in workers, and HLS should probably already be doing that at this point. That's definitely one of the things that just haven't got around to, but that's definitely on the list of future enhancements.
So you did mention V1 in there,
Mm-hmm.
and we kind of mentioned at the beginning that that's something we want to talk about. So yeah, like it's been a long time coming. We're coming up on, I love the notion that like 1.0 is when it's supposed to be production ready, and like Hls Js has been in production for...
I don't think it's ever been used in production, actually. That's what I heard.
I mean, who would be crazy enough to use it in production? I don't know. So yeah, but we are coming up on a V1 of Hls Js here, which is, I don't think that it's the milestone of its production ready, because I think we can all agree that it's been production ready for quite some time now. But what does that milestone mean to you and everyone else that's been working on it?
Right. Oh, so V1 means production ready. Like that was the V0 was kind of, we're not confident yet. I don't know. So at the point where I became maintainer of the project was already going in this direction, right? So just going back to earlier, I mentioned that John Bartos at JW Player was maintaining Hls Js. He put forward a spec for low latency LHLS, the Bartos spec, and it was getting a lot of momentum. But a lot of folks were saying, well, or a lot of people were in because there's already companies kind of using this chunk transfer style of live streaming on top of HLS. But a lot of people were going, well, Apple hasn't said okay yet. We're trying to get their blessing on this spec. And they came out and said, well, no, we have a different idea of how this is going to work. It's called Apple's Low Latency HLS, LLHLS. And it's quite different. Doesn't use chunk transfer. There's parts. And then John famously got off one camel and onto another at Will Law's talk in Demuxed, and essentially, in other words, went to work at Twitch and stopped working on the project. So at that point, it looked like I was going to pick up maintenance and try to shepherd through, the work until we get to 1.0. So getting to your question, what is 1.0? I think the plan was basically do a conversion to TypeScript for all the code in the project. And that was, 3/4 of the way through or more, as well as add low latency in one form or another. We already had the chunk transfer support there in kind of a demo mode. And that was pretty much it. There's like whatever else we might fix. Like, there'd be issues coming in and someone might respond like, well, it seems to work in our, version 1 fork. So that's what it's going to be. I made the decision that we wouldn't support LHLS since the spec kind of no longer has traction, no longer has support. We would add support instead for Apple's LHLS, and that would kind of be the main project, fix any issues, try to make sure it's a little more performant than the previous release, and call it V1. There's a few more things that, went in feature-wise, some better codec support, looking at some of the MP4 support, trying to improve that, some more live features, calculating drift and managing latency, controlling playback rate so you can kind of catch up if you need to. So some things like that related to low latency support. But it did take a long while. That's not just because LLHLS is kind of complex. It's made up of a lot of different features. It's also because I had 3 different forks in my lap that I was working with. So version 1 was actually based off of JW Player's fork of Hls Js. It had some different caption handling features, a couple other little tweaks in there. There was the kind of current V0, which was pretty production ready. People were using 0.12, whatever it was. And then there was like JW Player's fork that hadn't been updated to V1. There was like a fork of 0.12 or 14 or 13, whatever it was. What was important for me was not just like, okay, I got to take over what John was doing and get version 1 out. I have to kind of prove myself as a maintainer here of the project and show people that I'm supporting their use cases for the version of HLS Js they're using now before just shoving this new major release down the throat, right? So I had to get rid of one of these forks. So basically did this 0.13 and 0.14, totally messed with, the MP4 remuxing and got familiar with that. That probably took me 6 months. Oh, and there was this whole pandemic thing. 2020, I think is a better way of putting it, happened. And it wasn't until maybe like just last summer that I started feeling comfortable with where I was taking the previous version of the project. And at that point, I had replaced JW Player's fork with the one that's in open source. So JW Player was using 0.13, 0.14 releases that I was cutting, and I was starting work on LLHLS. And yeah, so now another, I don't know what year later, there's been 6 release candidates. I just cut the 6th one yesterday. The 7 digits that you were seeing might have been like a commit hash or something. I'm not sure. There's been a lot of those, and probably went from beta to RC a little early. What happened there was just we started getting a lot more feedback after cutting an RC. It's surprising how many more people start to test upgrading players when they see we're getting close to a big release. And I think more folks are actually rolling out solutions to LLHLS on the streaming side, right? So that's really cool. Like, people are putting it through its paces, and I've been responding to issues there and cutting more RCs than I'd like to. But hopefully by the time people hear this, 1.0 will be out. I think we're really close. I say that there could be 10 new issues I need to triage, and I'm not in a rush, but I do want to make sure it's not just solving what my company's needs. It really serves the community well. It is in production today with JW Player. Like, the RC5 is in production today with JW Player. It has for a few of the RCs. Most of the fixes in these RCs have been around LLHLS support. We pretty much built that feature with 2 sample streams from Apple, and here and there, some from Wowza. And so there's a lot more to do there in terms of testing stability and performance. But hopefully with the sort of use case that's similar to what Apple is presenting, like 1-second parts, you should be good. I hope.
So often with a major version, there's breaking changes along with it. Are there any major breaking changes to speak to?
Sure. I think for the most part, version 1 doesn't have breaking changes for like a simple setup use case, like set up Hls Js, attach a video tag, and load a URL. That should work exactly the same. Where things start to change a bit are in the configuration options. There's some new ones, some ones that have changed slightly, a couple defaults that have changed, like automatically clearing the back buffer. A lot of smart TV folks wanted that, but you can configure it depending on your smart TV. And after that, the biggest breaking changes are going to be if you're listening to events and the object structure of those events, a little bit in order of certain events. There's some things that changed there when we did this refactor to support chunk transfer. And there is an experiment, I labeled it an experimental feature, right? This one configuration option called progressive was the option that would stream bytes from a segment progressively. So rather than getting like the whole segment, you could get the chunks and it would append those. That's off by default, but you can turn it on if you still want to play around and make HLS a thing. Just, don't expect a lot of support from me. I've broken it once or twice in the pre-releases and kind of fixed it, but there's just certain situations in streams where like it's not everything's going to work perfectly. So it's experimental, and not the good kind of experimental, like we're almost there and going to make it work. It's the like, maybe this is actually deprecated before arrival, but it was a big part of the V1, and I thought it was worth kind of keeping in. But yeah, so breaking changes, events get pretty touchy. Oh, and the stats for loading. So when you get a loading event, you get this like stats objects that say like when something started loading, when it ended loading. That structure is totally different. So if those metrics are important to you, you'll need to follow the migration guide to just move things over.
Are you taking notes here, Heff? Or
Yeah, I was going to say, good to know. Good to know.
We made a guide for you, and would love feedback on that. It's kind of been a running thing, like a lot of this stuff changed over a year ago. And so I haven't made a new app with the old version and migrated it over to the new version to double check everything. Sort of a kitchen sink of, migration tests. That'd be cool, but I'd love to. It was in the ticket, It was like, let's do this. too much work. We have a lot of notes. We put them together in a migration guide, and we wish you all luck, but let us know if we missed anything. It'll go right into the migration guide, and feel free to contribute to it as well.
On that note, I would love to hear your thoughts on where do you see the future of the project? Like, where do you see Hls JS going?
Well, one thing is Apple is still updating the HLS spec. We've got some new features coming, so we're interested in those. Me personally, I would really like to have a little more focus on some broadcast features and features that might be good for smart TVs. So HDR and working with UHD content. It would just be fun. I don't get a chance to do, or haven't had much of a chance to do much with that. Like I said, there is some better support for codec and codec switching. Like, so in the old version, if you had a stream that had HEVC and H.264, Hls.js would either ignore the HEVC altogether, or it might even, in Safari where that codec is supported, HEVC supported, it might try to switch between the two but not do it properly. That's sort of supported now. Like, you can manually switch between the two, but initially it's going to pick one, and the ABR is just going to stick to a certain codec. But maybe in the future, ABR should be a little smarter. It should adapt based on some other principles that it doesn't have now, right? Like which codec is more efficient. I think there's a feature in HLS about prioritizing or giving a score to variants. So we don't use that yet.
Yeah, the new labels.
Yeah. We're also not using media capabilities in Chrome or other browsers, which I'd really like to do. So preventing a constrained device from, using 4K if it's not a good idea with the media capabilities API would be really cool. So we have issues. We have a media capabilities label that we can apply to issues. And so there's a couple waiting there. And a big one is performance. I mean, I wish I could say like all the performance issues have been resolved in version 1. It's ready. This is it, version 1. But there's just tons more to do. So like I was saying, MSE in workers and handling the network in workers, there's a lot of refactoring that needs to happen there. So yes, there will be yet another refactor of Hls.js. Maybe that's version 2. Maybe we get started and it's not that complicated. Version 1 is not the end all be all. Hopefully, like I think a lot of other folks would say, like it's a major update, but maybe we'll take these numbers a little less seriously now, or just as seriously as we have, and move quicker. Right? We'll see.
Well, that was the whole thing with like React a while back, right? Because it went from like 0, 0, 14, 0, 15, 16. Whoa. Because they were like, look, we've been 1.0 from the perspective of like, if you're thinking about it, 1.0 means like you can be using it in production, or they're like, we've been this way for a while. It's time to just make the jump. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I personally see like a big parallel there. Like Hls.js is massively used in production, like maybe not everybody, but like it feels like the most common HLS JavaScript implementation I see in the wild, bar none. And so, it's clearly production ready. It's out there. People are using it all the time. And then just this, I'm excited about this 1.0 feeling like the project can kind of put the foot on the gas a little bit more. You know what I mean? Is that how it feels to you at all? Like, yeah. Going from 1.0 to 1.1, 1.10, 1.20 feels like less of a big deal than going from 0.14 to 1, just because of like the perception. Am I like it remotely on base?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has that perception. You can't help it, but ultimately, major update is about breaking changes being introduced in the API, right, or in the functionality and even user experience. I think would be acceptable. And so, if there were a 2, it wouldn't just be something in the guts changing about Hls.js. I think it might be just another kind of what about the future. Maybe there's too many configuration options in Hls.js, or the whole config is too flat and we need to think about kind of restructuring the API a little bit. Also depends on how things go with this release and the migration guide. Like if folks upgrade and they find they're just having a lot of trouble, or we didn't document things as well as we course correct within version 1, we might take those lessons and apply them to version 2, right? Like how do we set this up so it's more intuitive for folks to find the correct path to build their implementation or get at the underlying data in HLS. So I think that'll be kind of what drives major updates and a little bit of how often we want to take them on. But there is certainly something about just like cruising in maintenance mode and just making it really as solid as it can be and seeing if more and more folks will keep using the project. It was really encouraging during Demuxed 2020 to hear how many people were using Hls Js, and I felt a bit remiss for not trying to even do this kind of talk at the conference last year.
I hear there's something happening this year.
Well, the other thing about, was it October, was like Big Sur was coming out and iOS 14. I don't know if it had just came out or was about to come out. I forget. But that for me was also a milestone of like, we've got to get this done by like, we want to drop Hls Js v1 with LHS at the same time Apple drops their update. And I couldn't do it. It was, it was tough getting things in over the summer, Delta playlists and part loading and stuff like that. So, but, again, like having like really pushed through to try to get it closer, but feel like, man, who even has, these streams and like, who's going to use this? But hearing, at Demuxed, like in every other talk, someone was like, yeah, so I threw this together with Hls Js, or check it out, component video player with Hls Js. Like that was awesome. It really encouraged me and kept me going.
So we are at time for our session here, but you and I were talking about this in Slack the other day. I wanted to like throw it out there for you. What do you need? What do you want? Like, what are you looking for in terms of, if folks want to help out with a project, get involved, maintaining a large open source project, as Steve can attest to, is a pain in the ass sometimes, but it can also be like really rewarding. But, what are ways that the community could help and support you, or if people want to get involved? What are the on-ramps that you see into the project for folks that want to start contributing?
Yeah, I see you guys as the example of community building. And for myself, it's like not a strong suit. A challenge I have is looking at contributions, PR specifically, trying to give good feedback and PR review. But sometimes you see something and you're like, I don't know if this is a good idea. Sometimes it's going in the right direction, but you're not so sure about the implementation. Other times I'm just really distracted with some other aspect of the project and I can't really devote the amount of time. Like you can't just look at a PR on the surface sometimes and go, the code looks good, so let's just accept it. Like there's a whole feature underneath that you really need to think about, like, is this feature being implemented correctly? And that can be really difficult. It can take a lot of time just to ramp up to understand the problem. And maybe, I'm sure there's ways to mitigate that, or at least help with giving some guidance in PR templates or the contributing guideline in terms of asking folks to really explain why something is important or how to do that ramp up. Just because I've been working on this project for the last year and, that video company for however many years, it doesn't make me an expert at everything, right? And I do have to say no sometimes. But more important than that, I don't want that to turn off people. I want to really grow the community. I'd like to see some other folks, be interested in coming on and helping maintain the project, whether it's triaging and answering issues, collaborating on future projects. A really, really big one that I feel is like a huge gap in the project as it stands now is our demo and sample streams, our test streams. I'm really jealous of Dash.js and the industry forums collection of sample videos that like have like a little credit to like, oh, YouTube contributed these and Wowza contributed these streams, and it's like, oh, what? How come they're not just handing me streams? Like I need a beautiful list of streams by feature and by company, that an encoder and all this sort of thing. So if you're listening, throw some streams at me. But I think also our demo needs to have a little bit nicer of a design to make it a nicer feeling home for said contributions. So that's something I've been thinking about, and hopefully something that's in the future for the project. And I think it would be a great way for people to get involved.
Awesome. Well, any parting words from y'all, Phil and Steve?
This has been great. Appreciate you jumping on, Rob, and chatting through this.
No, thanks. This is really exciting. Congratulations on getting to 1.0 production ready.
Thanks, guys.
Huge congrats.
Thanks so much.
So thanks again, Rob. That was awesome. Really looking forward to 1.0. Hopefully by the time this is released, it will be available. Check it out, Hls Js, github.com/video-dev/Hls Js. If you want to get involved, it sounds like there could be some help triaging issues or whatever else that might mean, but I bet Rob would more than welcome some help there or test streams. Also, don't forget to start thinking about your Demuxed talk. Rob, sounds like you should be thinking about a Demuxed talk. We're probably planning on opening up call for papers, same as time as usual, early summer-ish. So think...
A little earlier than last year. I think. Last year is a little hot.
A little earlier than last year. So think like May, end of April, May for when you can start submitting talks. So be thinking about those. Mega Meetup in May. Ping us if you want to talk or if you want us to speak at another meetup or any of ours. Thanks again, Rob. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see y'all next time.
That's all we have for today. But as always, we'd love to hear what you thought, even if you disagree. So please reach out on Twitter at Demuxed.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, be sure to check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.